They say land remembers, and I believe that. Every sunrise over these hills, every groan of the old barn door, every muddy bootprint baked into the earth, it all carries a memory. My name is Ezra Blackwood, and this farm has been in my family for 5 generations. My grandfather planted the first peach trees here with his bare hands after coming home from the war. He said the silence of the fields helped him forget the gunfire. My father was born here. I was born here. This place isn't just home, it's my blood, my bones, my anchor. Even after becoming a deputy sheriff, I never left it behind. Every weekend, every moment off duty, I'm out here fixing fences, mowing overgrown grass, or tending the goats. I'm not just here for the peace. I'm here to protect what's mine from weather, from strangers, and most recently, from a woman named Karen Pemberton. When my parents passed away, they left me this 80-acre farm tucked right along the outskirts of town. What I didn't realize was that over the years, new housing developments had popped up like mushrooms on the land around it. Half a mile from my barn now stood a gated suburban paradise with pristine sidewalks, garden gnomes, and an army of HOA enforcers led by none other than Karen. Karen Pemberton was everything you'd expect from a suburban queen bee. Mid-50s, platinum, blonde bob that shimmered like polished chrome, hot pink pantsuit that screamed for attention, and the attitude of a retired royal general. She was the self-declared president of the neighborhood HOA, and she didn't just enforce rules, she weaponized them. The first time she knocked on my door, I was ankle-deep in mud, trying to rewire the electric fence around the chicken coop. Her SUV, some luxury behemoth with blacked-out windows, rolled up my gravel driveway like a tank. She stepped out like she owned the land beneath her feet and tapped on my barn door with her designer handbag, as if she were summoning a butler. "Young man," she said, her voice laced with faux concern, "are you aware that burning leaves on your property releases particulates that drift into my community's airspace?" I stared at her, confused. "Ma'am, I live on a farm. I've been burning compost for years." "Well," she sniffed, "your smoke is disturbing the ambience of our garden club meeting. We have very sensitive residents." That was the first spark. Then came the complaints about my roosters crowing too early, about my goat Marvin wandering too close to her tulip beds, about the unsightly a rusted tractor visible from her cul-de-sac, as if the very presence of my farm was an offense to her manicured world. But what Karen didn't realize, what she underestimated, was that I wasn't just some hillbilly she could bully. I was Deputy Sheriff Ezra Blackwood, and I played by the law, not by HOA fairy tales. One evening, I returned home from a night patrol shift to find a giant orange violation notice taped to my gate. It read, "Notice of non-compliance. You are in violation of subsection 42B, non-approved land usage. HOA requires uniformity in property appearance. Remove all farming equipment within 14 days or face penalty." I nearly laughed out loud. The HOA had no jurisdiction on my land. I wasn't part of their neighborhood. In fact, a strip of woodland separated my land from theirs. Yet Karen had taken it upon herself to extend her rule across those trees, declaring my farm an eyesore to the community aesthetic. The next day, I walked right into her development, past the wrought iron gate, ignoring the nosy neighbors peeking through blinds like I was an intruder. I knocked on Karen's front door. She answered in her usual flair-full makeup, hot pink pantsuit, pearl necklace, like she was hosting a fashion show for bored housewives. "I don't know how you got past security," she snapped. "I have a badge," I replied calmly, showing her the gold star on my chest. "Your notice on my gate, it's illegal. You have no jurisdiction over my land. You tape anything to my property again and I'll consider it harassment." Karen blinked, surprised. "You're a cop, Deputy Sheriff," I corrected her. That should have ended it, but instead, it made things worse. Karen didn't like being challenged, especially by someone she couldn't control. From that day on, she escalated. I'd find trash bags dumped near my fence line, dead flowers pulled from my garden beds, my mailbox mysteriously dented one morning. Then came the false complaints anonymous 911 calls about suspected drug activity on a rural property. I knew it was her. No one else had a grudge that deep, but she never used her name, and without proof, I couldn't touch her. Until the day everything changed. It was a Sunday. I was hauling hay from the barn to the goat pen, when I heard the distant wail of sirens. 2 sheriff cruisers came flying down the gravel road. I stood frozen as they parked, not because I was afraid, but because I knew who was behind it. Karen emerged from behind them, holding her phone up like a weapon. "That's him," she shouted. "He's trespassing. He doesn't even live here. This property is abandoned." The deputies were rookies, freshly assigned to our county. They stepped out cautiously. "You Ezra Blackwood?" one asked. "Yeah," I nodded. "And I'm guessing you didn't check the property records before coming out here." Karen huffed. "He's lying. I'm the HOA president. This land is under community management. He has no deed." I looked at her. Calmly, slowly, I reached into the satchel slung over my shoulder, the one I always carried on weekends, and pulled out 2 things, my badge and a warrant. Karen froze. "You want to talk about property?" I asked, stepping forward. "I've got your name right here on a court-issued warrant. Fraud, illegal formation of a homeowners association, misuse of community funds, identity falsification." Her eyes went wide. "W, what is this?" "I've been investigating you for 6 months," I said. "You're not a legitimate HOA. You forged your way into power. You've been stealing dues from your neighbors, creating fake bylaws, and issuing illegal penalties." No, this can't be," she stammered, backing away. I turned to the rookies. "Cuff her." And just like that, the queen bee of the cul-de-sac was dethroned, not by drama, not by protest, but by the law. As the patrol car drove off with Karen in the back seat, wailing about her rights, I stood on my gravel driveway and looked out over the fields. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the peach trees, my grandfather's trees, my father's land, my home. They say land remembers, so does justice. The day after Karen Pemberton's ridiculous 911 stunt, Ezra Blackwood sat on his wraparound porch, sipping black coffee and replaying the entire encounter in his mind. The red and blue lights, the accusation, the smug tilt of her head, and the dead silence that fell when he flipped his badge, all of it played on repeat. But Ezra wasn't just thinking about what happened. He was planning, because this wasn't the first time Karen had flexed her authority, and it sure wouldn't be the last unless he did something permanent. Ezra didn't become a deputy sheriff by accident. He came from a long line of lawmen, and justice wasn't just a profession, it was family tradition. And right now, that tradition meant gathering evidence, not just emotions. He headed inside, placed his cup on the kitchen counter, and opened a cabinet that hadn't been touched in a while. Inside were boxes of documents, land deeds, zoning permits, family tax records, everything from when his grandfather purchased the land back in 1954. As he opened the oldest folder, a gust of cool air from the vent hit him, along with the faint scent of cedar and old ink. Inside the files were photos of his grandpa fencing the farm with his bare hands. It was hard, dusty work, but it was his land, bought fair and square. That's what Ezra needed to prove, because Karen's main argument was that the land was technically part of the HOA, now a lie she'd been spinning for years. But in truth, the farm had always been zoned outside HOA boundaries. He needed hard proof, so he took everything, old maps, surveys, the original signed purchase agreement with county stamps, and made copies. He spent the whole afternoon digitizing documents, cross-referencing lot lines with county GIS maps, and highlighting every regulation Karen had violated, including one that said any interference with private agricultural land was a felony offense. At sunset, he drove into town and paid a visit to someone who owed him a favor, a teller, county clerk, and an old high school friend. She was tough, smart, and had the dry sense of humor only years of bureaucracy could give you. "You again," she said, not looking up from her keyboard. "Don't worry," Ezra said. "I brought donuts this time." "Oh, then by all means, tell me what laws Karen's trying to rewrite this week." He slid a flash drive across her desk. "I need a certified boundary survey, plus a search on HOA charter filings under the name Cypress Shadows Community Council. Look for anything fishy." Mia nodded, popped in the flash drive, and started typing. "Let's see. Oh wow, what? Her HOA was never approved by the state HOA commission. She filed paperwork, but it's all provisional. No final authorization, no tax ID. It's basically An illegal club with printed newsletters? Ezra raised an eyebrow. So technically, she's impersonating a public entity. Technically, Mia laughed. She's running a fraudulent municipal authority. That's jail time. Ezra grinned. Print me all of it. I'll need it for the sheriff's office. On the way home, Ezra's truck bed was stacked with manila folders and county stamped binders. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. As he drove past the HOA neighborhood entrance, the one with the fake brick columns and half-lit lanterns, he saw Karen in her yard, pacing on her phone again. She spotted his truck and raised her voice, clearly telling someone, "Yes, he's here again, and I want that tractor towed by morning." Ezra parked, stepped out, and approached calmly. "Evening, Karen." She turned, still clutching her phone. "This is harassment. I live here, not for long." Ezra smiled. "You really should check with the county before you make threats. Otherwise, things might get legal." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Is that supposed to scare me?" "No," he said, leaning close, "but these might." He handed her a certified envelope, sealed and stamped. "Official copy of your HOA revoked application. You'll want to read that after you step off my land." She opened the envelope, her hands visibly trembling. "Expect a visit from the sheriff's department by end of week," Ezra said, "and next time you call 911 on a landowner, make sure he's not the one bringing the warrant." Karen didn't respond. She just stared at the documents like they were nuclear launch codes. Ezra turned and walked away, leaving her frozen mid-lawn, phone dangling uselessly in her hand. But it wasn't over, because Ezra knew Karen. She didn't go down without a tantrum, and she still had allies. A few HOA board members were just as corrupt, and they'd likely try to cover her tracks, which meant Ezra had to be faster. Back home, he called Deputy Chief Reynolds and laid out everything: the fake HOA filings, the zoning violations, the harassment reports, and the misuse of emergency services. Reynolds sighed. "You're not making this up, are you? I've got the receipts. Want them? Bring 'em in. I'll run it up the chain." By morning, Ezra had an official date for a formal inquiry, but he didn't stop there. He started canvassing the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking folks off the record if they'd ever had odd fines, unexplained fees, or confrontations with Karen. The stories poured out like floodwater. "She fined me for leaving my garage door open during a power outage. She accused my son of skateboarding on the sidewalk, then banned him from the community pool. She told me to paint over my mural or face a lawsuit. It was a mural of my deceased husband." Ezra documented everything. He wasn't just fighting for himself now, he was standing up for dozens of silenced residents. That night, as the crickets chirped and the moon rose, Ezra sat back on his porch and exhaled deeply. The game had changed. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant now, she was a criminal under formal review. And Ezra, he was just getting started. Ezra Blackwood had dealt with criminals, liars, and manipulators throughout his law enforcement career. But something about Karen Pemberton's relentless escalation told him this wasn't just HOA pettiness. It was deeper, criminal, and personal. 2 days after her 911 stunt, Ezra arrived at the sheriff's station in plain clothes, armed with coffee, a notebook, and a plan. His partner, Deputy Maureen Ellis, was already waiting in the briefing room. She glanced up from a stack of folders. "You really think she's dirty?" she asked. Ezra gave a slow nod. "She's too confident, too organized. I'm telling you, this is more than just a power trip over lawn gnomes." He laid out his suspicions: fraudulent fines, forged documents, embezzlement, harassment. Maureen raised her eyebrows. "And you think she's weaponized the HOA like a front?" "I don't think," Ezra said. "I know. They started assembling a task force, not a formal one, not yet, but a quiet team of trusted officers, local attorneys, and even a forensic accountant who once handled a case involving a HOA president who built a pool with community funds. In her own backyard, the goal: let Karen think she won. Let her believe Ezra had backed down after the police call, and meanwhile gather every ounce of proof against her. By Friday, Ezra installed a small camera in the front corner of the Blackwood property, facing the gate where Karen had first confronted him. Then another camera, nestled in an old oak tree, caught the entire road leading into the neighborhood. Every time Karen trespassed, harassed a visitor, or made threatening gestures, the lens recorded, and Karen, bless her arrogance, couldn't help herself. She stopped by the farm almost daily, first to scream about non-existent zoning violations, then to leave official HOA warnings printed on stationery that Ezra traced back to a fake P.O. box. One afternoon, she even brought 2 men in suits claiming to be private inspectors. But Ezra recognized them. They were cousins of Karen's, both of whom had criminal records for impersonation and fraud. Ezra just smiled and waved. Let the camera roll. Chapter 3. 2. The HOA meeting bombshell. A week later, Ezra showed up uninvited to the HOA board meeting. It was held in the clubhouse at the center of Oak Ridge Estates, a lavish space paid for by excessive HOA fees. Karen stood at the front in her usual attire, bright coral suit, pearls, and a smirk that could curdle milk. When Ezra entered, the room went quiet. "Unless you've come to apologize, Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you leave," she said. Ezra pulled out a thick file. "I just wanted to return this. You left it taped to my fence yesterday." He opened it and read aloud, "Violation, property structures in disrepair, fine $3,200. Funny how the report's timestamp says 2 p.m., but I was home at that time, filming my barn repair with a time-stamped GoPro." He handed it to the crowd. People started murmuring. Ezra then walked to a projector and, without permission, plugged in a USB stick. The screen lit up. Video clips played. Karen yelling at a delivery driver, demanding a neighbor remove a wheelchair ramp, threatening a teenage girl over chalk art on the sidewalk. The room shifted. Murmurs turned into outrage. Ezra faced the board. "These aren't community standards. These are crimes, and you're all complicit unless you stop her." Karen stormed toward him. "You don't have jurisdiction here." Ezra calmly held up his badge. "Actually," he said, "I do." That same evening, Ezra met with Maureen and the accountant, Walter. Walter laid out what they found. Dozens of payments routed from the HOA general account to a shell company, one registered in Karen's name under her maiden name. The invoices claimed things like landscape maintenance, legal fees, and security patrols, none of which were ever actually provided. Worse, Karen had forged signatures on at least 4 property liens, pushing elderly homeowners toward foreclosure, then offering to buy them out at a discounted rate through another shell company. Ezra was stunned but not surprised. "This is organized fraud," Maureen said. "She's not just a nuisance, she's a thief." They prepared the affidavit for a warrant. The last piece of the puzzle came from a retired HOA secretary named Marla. She'd left Oak Ridge Estates after Karen forced her out over a petty parking dispute, but she kept copies of everything: emails, meeting minutes, even a voice recording of Karen bragging about manipulating HOA elections using proxy votes and fake mailing addresses. Ezra listened to it 3 times. It was damning. He called in a favor at the state attorney's office and scheduled a coordinated bust. Karen had no idea that her next HOA board meeting would be her last. August 3rd, 7:55 a.m. sharp. The sun rose hot and angry over Oak Ridge Estates, and so did justice. Ezra Blackwood stood outside the community clubhouse, sleeves rolled up, vest marked Sheriff Task Force, and his badge gleaming like truth itself. Around him, a dozen officers moved in quiet, coordinated formation. Deputy Maureen Ellis stood beside him with the signed warrant in hand. "This is it," she said. Ezra nodded. "Let's end this." Inside, the HOA board members were already gathered for their monthly meeting. Karen stood at the head of the long mahogany table, clipboard in hand, smug as ever. "We have a lot to get through today," she began, "including foreclosing on that woman who planted tomatoes in her flower bed." Suddenly, bang, 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 3 crisp knocks shook the room. Karen frowned. "What now?" The doors swung open. Ezra walked in, fully uniformed, flanked by 2 deputies and a county auditor. "Karen Pemberton," Ezra said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, falsifying documents, voter manipulation, harassment, and impersonation of public authority." The room froze. Karen laughed. "You can't be serious. This is a community board meeting." Ezra stepped forward and handed her the thick stack of paper. "This is a warrant, signed by Judge Holloway. Your HOA reign is over." Karen's face turned white, then red, then white again. "You can't do this to me," she shrieked, pointing at the board. "He's not even allowed to be here. He's just a homeowner. He's trespassing. Ezra turned to his bodycam, still rolling. Actually, I'm not. I'm a homeowner and a sworn officer acting under jurisdiction granted by the state of Texas. And you, Karen, are a suspect under active investigation. Deputy Maureen stepped forward with cuffs. Hands behind your back, ma'am. Karen tried to bolt. She actually ran, heels clacking like a startled goat across the tile floor, but she didn't make it 2 steps before tripping over a folding chair. The room gasped as she hit the ground with all the dignity of a tipped garden gnome. Maureen gently cuffed her wrists. You have the right to remain silent. Ezra looked around the room. The board members were stunned, motionless. A few pulled out phones, filming. One elderly woman, Mrs. Chamberlain, stood and clapped slowly. About time, by 3 p.m. Karen's mugshot was the lead image on local news. HOA president arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud case. Aerial footage showed police raiding her home. Investigators carried out boxes of paperwork, computers, and a hidden folder labeled backdoor bylaws. Community members gathered at Ezra's farm that evening. Neighbors who once kept their distance now brought cookies, lemonade, even a pie. Ezra stood in the barnyard under fairy lights as people thanked him, hugged him, shook his hand. Mrs. Liu, whose son had been fined $600 for playing basketball in the driveway, gave Ezra a tearful hug. You saved this community, she said. The HOA board was dissolved by emergency vote. A special election was scheduled, with Ezra appointed as interim oversight chair by county order. Ezra didn't want power. He just wanted fairness, and now, finally, it was returning to Oak Ridge Estates. 3 weeks later, Ezra received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. You think this is over? It's not. I know people. I made this neighborhood what it is. You'll never outlast me. HOA was my kingdom. Ezra chuckled. He turned the letter over, stamped it into his evidence folder, and filed it under K for Karen. Then he walked back outside, fed his chickens, and took a sip of sweet tea. The land was quiet again, peaceful, just the way his father had built it. And the HOA, now it was just a committee, not a dictatorship. Because this time the sheriff lived here too. 2 months passed. Autumn rolled into Oak Ridge like a soft breath, golden leaves dancing along fences, kids racing down sidewalks that were finally free of HOA warning signs. Ezra Blackwood had returned to his peaceful life. His barn was nearly rebuilt. The rooster crowed at 6:07 a.m. daily. All was well until one Monday morning. Ezra's mailbox held a thick white envelope with no stamp. No return address, just his name in jagged cursive. Inside, Dear Ezra, I may be in here, but I still have roots in that soil. You'll never kill the tree. You're a farmer, you should know that. K. Attached was a hand-drawn map of Oak Ridge Estates, with 2 houses circled in red. Ezra recognized the names. Both were homes Karen once visited, frequently, board loyalists. By October, strange things began happening in Oak Ridge. An elderly couple who had never paid a fine received $200 for past violations. HOA fees mysteriously increased by 11% with no vote recorded. A new resident had her Halloween decorations torn down in the night, labeled noncompliant by someone unknown. Mysterious letters arrived claiming to be from the interim HOA Oversight Committee, demanding back payments. But Ezra hadn't sent them. Someone or some group was operating in the shadows, not officially HOA, but impersonating it, and residents were falling for it. Ezra called a meeting at the clubhouse. Only 10 people showed up. Many were scared. Some didn't want to get involved again. One man whispered, "They say Karen's still pulling strings from inside." Ezra frowned. Something told him this wasn't just a rumor. Karen had help. The truth came out when Ezra followed a tip from an anonymous letter left on his windshield. It led him to house #27 on Maple Hollow Lane. There, living under the radar, was Danielle Vickers, a former assistant HOA secretary, and Karen's most loyal enforcer. She had legally purchased the house 2 weeks before Karen's arrest. Ezra knocked, no answer. He returned the next morning, this time wearing his official task force vest. Danielle opened the door, smirking. "I wondered how long it'd take you," she said. Ezra showed her a printout of the fake fines. "This your work?" She shrugged. "I just deliver the mail." Behind her, Ezra spotted a whiteboard covered in scribbles. At the top, Operation HOA Reinstatement Phase 2. Ezra didn't waste time. He contacted the Texas Department of Housing Oversight and submitted the forged documents Danielle had mailed to residents. Within 48 hours, a full audit was launched. Danielle was issued a cease and desist. Karen's influence, though still lingering, was losing grip. Ezra also took it one step further. He launched a podcast called HOA, Homeowners Against Abuse. It featured real stories from people across the country who'd suffered under tyrannical HOA. It went viral, and overnight, Oak Ridge was on the map not for its golf course or gates, but as the town that stood up to its bully queen. Karen sat on her bunk in orange scrubs, watching Ezra's podcast on a cheap tablet. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just smirked. Then she opened her journal to a new page. At the top she wrote, Chapter 6, Karen's lawsuit coming soon. It was a crisp December morning. The wind tasted like snow. Ezra Blackwood was finishing up repairs on the old horse stable when his phone buzzed. A notification from the county clerk's office, Case No. TX 88907, Karen Pemberton v. The Oak Ridge community, Ezra Blackwood, and the state of Texas HOA registry. He blinked twice. Is this real? It was. Karen, currently in county jail, awaiting federal trial for fraud, had just filed a civil lawsuit from behind bars, claiming her arrest was unlawful. Ezra had trespassed on his own property while under HOA jurisdiction. The HOA dissolution was politically motivated. She had been slandered nationally by Ezra's podcast, and most boldly, she demanded to be reinstated as HOA president. At the bottom of the 54-page lawsuit, one sentence stood out: Presiding Judge Franklin D. Caro. Ezra's stomach dropped. That name was familiar, too familiar. Franklin D. Caro, a retired family friend of the Pembertons. Ezra's dad once called him the King of Favors. He'd been forced into early retirement 10 years ago for ethics violations, but was quietly reinstated during a judge shortage last year. Ezra knew exactly what Karen was doing. She was shopping for judges, and somehow she'd gotten one. Ezra met with his attorney, Me Torres, who didn't sugarcoat it. This isn't about money. She's not trying to win, she's trying to bury you in court dates, legal fees, and public confusion. Karen's lawsuit did something Ezra didn't expect. It divided Oak Ridge. Some residents, tired of the HOA drama, began siding with Karen, believing Ezra's actions had been too aggressive. A few said on Facebook, at least with Karen, the lawns were neat. We didn't ask to be part of this war. Ezra should have left it alone. Even worse, news outlets started picking up the case. One headline read, Deputy Sheriff or Small Town Tyrant, Texas man accused of overthrowing HOA. Ezra's reputation was being shredded not by truth, but by narrative. Ezra wasn't about to roll over. With Me Torres leading the charge, they filed a motion to dismiss, citing lack of merit, judicial bias, and abuse of the court system. They also uncovered something interesting. Karen had sent over 200 handwritten letters from jail, not just to Oak Ridge residents, but to media contacts, real estate developers, and political action committees. One letter to a shady Florida developer even said, if Oak Ridge votes to reinstate me, I can guarantee you rezoning access within 6 months. We can push out the old families. That was evidence of attempted real estate manipulation. Ezra handed it to the district attorney, and that's when things escalated. On the morning of the first court date, Ezra entered the dusty old courthouse in full uniform, not for intimidation, but for pride. Karen appeared via video call from the county jail, unbothered, hair tied, smile practiced. Judge Caro leaned forward and delivered his ruling on the dismissal motion. He denied it. But then he said something odd. However, due to recent evidence involving real estate manipulation, this case may be escalated to federal jurisdiction. Until then, discovery may not proceed. Ezra and me looked at each other. What just happened? Karen smiled again. She had succeeded in doing just enough damage to stay relevant and delay her reckoning. That night, Ezra returned home, exhausted. On his porch sat another envelope. Inside was a note scribbled in red pen. A badge doesn't make you a good man. A barn doesn't make you a farmer, and a podcast doesn't make you a hero. K. Beneath it, a photo, Ezra's father, standing beside Karen and Judge Caro. Years ago, Ezra clenched his jaw. Karen wasn't done, not yet, but neither was he.